Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite revenue podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and we have a very special guest today. We have Doug Landis, growth partner at Emergence Capital. You might have heard of him if you follow some of the best revenue leaders out there. And thanks so much time, Doug, for sharing your time and advice with the community here.
Of course, you got it. I was just right as you made that intro, Ross. I was like, do you call everyone special? Because isn't everybody a snowflake that is on here? That's going to share some of their knowledge and experience with you. I mean,
Everyone is
oh
special in their
man,
own way,
yeah, there
Doug,
you
for
go,
sure.
there you go.
But I
It's
should have
like
guessed I should have said extra
no,
special
no, no,
with
no, no,
Doug
no,
here.
no. I don't need that pressure. Come on, let's lower the bar. We're going to lower the bar here.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we're
it's
going to
it's
temper
great to be.
expectations.
Yeah, yeah,
But
totally.
before we get into it and hear a
Yeah,
bit about yourself and your background and some of your takes on, maybe some areas where people can operationalize better deal execution. Yeah, a bit about yourself and your
yeah,
background would be
totally,
awesome.
totally, totally. And I'm sure if you've heard a podcast with me involved, you've probably heard this before. But I like to consider myself a marketer wrapped in. I'm a sales professional wrapped in a marketer's body that cares more about customers and customer value than probably most chief customer officers. But at the end of the day, it's because I look at marketing, sales, and customer success as a unified revenue organization. So this is kind of like operationalizing deal excellence actually includes everybody
Yeah,
in on the revenue side of the organization, if you really think about it that way. Emergence Capital, just for context, we're an early stage. Series A is our focus sweet spot. B2B SaaS investment firm. We've been around for just over 20 years, or we're about to have our 20-year anniversary. We made a bet 20 years ago that all software was going to move to the cloud. That's a pretty good bet. And with investments in like Salesforce and Zoom and Box and Viva and Bill.com, Doximity, you name it, Zoom. I'd say that was a pretty decent bet many years ago. And look, I think at the end of the day too, we're also kind of known for go to market and operationalizing go to market for our portfolio companies. Typically, they got $1 million in revenue, and we're like, cool, we know the playbook to get you from $1 million to 4 to 12 to 36 72 and beyond, whatever triple double that doesn't exist anymore that you think you want to follow. We've seen the movie before. And by the way, I am a member of the bag carrying community. I love selling. I love doing deals. I love coaching reps on deals, coaching managers. So I get in the weeds with our companies on the revenue side specifically. And we just kind of, in fact, I'm in Arizona right now to sit down with one of our CEOs tomorrow, and they have one rep, and we're going to build out their 2024 plan.
amazing,
Right.
amazing,
So it's like, what does that look like? How do I hire? Who do I hire? How do I think about it? And I'm like, great, cool. Here's a list of all the data that we need in order to be able to kind of hypothesize, because there's a little bit of hypothesizing, and then we're going to map out the risks of the plan and what you have to believe and what has to be true and all that other fun stuff.
amazing, amazing. Well, it sounds like, yeah, kind of living at the intersection of, taking big bets, but also, like you said, operationalizing some of that stuff, which is,
Yeah.
yeah, excited to get into today. But yeah, maybe first
Fun.
question, just to get to know you a little bit before we dive into some of the strategy pieces. Always curious because I don't think a lot of kids, sit up at night when they're 10 years old, 5 years old, and think about being, a revenue leader and all this stuff. People stumble upon I think one of the best careers out there. But how did you find your way into revenue leadership to start?
So, I think that's actually a really great question. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of blind luck, right? Like when I was in college, I was all ready to go to law school, and I was at the
Yep.
career center. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to law school, and I'm like, and then I was talking to different companies about different jobs as I'm prepping to take my LSATs, and then my dad was like, "Are you sure?" He was a lawyer. He was like, "Are you sure you want to be a lawyer?" And then we sat down and had the conversation what a day in the life of a lawyer was like. And I was like, "Oof, don't know if I want to do that."
Yep.
And then I was like, well, what do I want to do? What am I good at? And I think, you know, thankful to the people at the career center. Everybody was like, dude, you should kind of get in sales. You can talk to you can talk to a flower on the side of the road. But that's also not what's key. I mean, that's helpful, but that's really
Hmm.
not what's a key to being successful. So I mean, look, how did I get to be where I am right now? I think it's luck. And the other thing is like just really having a really high give a shit factor and having a massive network. Like I care about my relationships, and I come from a perspective of giving first. Unlike so many people on LinkedIn where they add you and you're like, sure, accept. And they're like, hey, can we spend some time and talk about how we can collaborate? I'm like, dude, I don't know you from a ham sandwich. Why am I going to give you my time yet? Like, let's
Yeah.
build on this relationship first before we start going on dates, so to speak. So yeah, that's a little bit of the background how I got here.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting how many folks kind of stumble upon it and kind of how they get there. I also took my LSAT at one time. Actually, after my first week at Stripe doing sales, I took it for the second time. But honestly, after that couple weeks, I was like, I got the bug, and yeah, I haven't looked back since. But I love that.
Yeah.
Maybe before we get into some of the strategy stuff, curious to get your take on what do you think the most challenging part of once you found your way into revenue leadership and, loving it, what was the most challenging part of that job? Obviously there's the fun of spending time with clients and supporting reps and seeing people grow their careers, but what do you think the hardest part of running
I
those teams
mean,
are?
what's interesting is like, look, it's when you run a sales organization, you learn that people usually, kind of are stronger at one part of the process than the other, right? Some people are great at building pipe. Some people are great at closing deals. They can close deals. Like you give me a deal, I got that thing closed tomorrow. I think fundamentally, as you kind of take a step back, I think fundamentally the biggest, most challenging aspects to being both a rep or running a team is building pipeline, because pipeline cures all ails. Like if you got a lot of pipeline, you're in pretty good shape, right? You can fine tune everything else. But if you don't have a lot of pipeline, your pipeline's pretty dry, then every single one of those conversations matters so much. And it's like the
Yeah.
pressure builds because maybe you're not prepared, or maybe the anxiety and the nerves build. But the other thing is managing up and like setting expectations. And like, look, being on the dark side, jumping ship and being on the other side of the table here, I realize, one, there's a lot of investors that have never been operators.
Hmm.
Right. So, and two, it's quick to be like, oh, okay, so we missed a quarter, time to transition out our revenue leader. And so revenue leaders, it's up to you to manage up properly, to
Yeah.
be wildly
Yeah.
transparent, to know your data inside and out. And so that, because here's the thing, we all know this. If you're a manager, your team, you don't want a surprise from your team when they say they're going to hit their number and all of a sudden they fall short. And you're like, oh, and you're, kind of stuck there with your pants around your ankles. Well, guess what? Your boss, the CEO or your SVP of sales, they don't want surprises either. So learning how to manage up and learning how to understand what everybody up the chain cares about and giving everyone visibility into that and not being afraid is super important. So like those to me are the two hardest things that we can kind of control, some of which we can't, right? Because pipeline is pipeline. And we can do the best we can.
No, I love that kind of the micro level, the deal stuff, the pipeline at the macro level, the expectation setting when things don't work out. It's interesting because it's a lot of things that I never had the in between moment, right? I went from being a top seller, frontline leader to, CEO. And a lot of folks will ask me that are kind of, my peers in their stage and they're kind of at this like senior director VP level. They just ask me like, how would you want someone managing up to you? When I explain to them, they're like, oh, I never like we're so good with customers as their stakeholders. I think sellers
Yeah.
sometimes forget to think about those other internal stakeholders. I definitely didn't think about that
Up, up.
effectively when I
And,
was at an
and you,
organization.
it's interesting, Ross, I think the hardest job in a sales organization is the frontline sales leader, because they got to
100%.
manage up, they got to manage down, they got to manage sideways, they got to hire, they got to have a bench, and you know what? 9 times out of 10, they don't make shit for money because they've
It's the
got,
hardest, lowest paying.
dude,
Yeah, totally.
it's the worst, right? So you got 8 people on your team, two of them are killing it, 3 of them you think have a chance, and the other 3 are like, oh, what do I do? And then you try and spend a bunch of time there, but you really want, like, it's just brutal, brutal.
Yeah, it's impossible job for sure. Awesome. Well, switching gears away from kind of your journey and some of those takeaways to what we're going to talk about today, which is kind of these 3 key facets. And so glad that you called these out. I think different perspectives for sure, but kind of around what you said, you being this kind of marketing brain salesperson. I think these all really fit into that, especially talking about number 2, the why. Maybe I'll introduce each 3 of them, and then we can
Yeah, totally,
dive into them specifically. So the
totally.
3 things that you had, which was first building consensus by aligning with priorities on a singular problem. Love that for many reasons. We'll get into it. Both around, well, everything there.
I mean, it's part of
Number
the Accord
2,
value proposition. So yeah, you should like it.
unrelated to Accord. Why I'm so excited about that one. Number 2, the why change, why now, why us. Very, very topical these days, and folks kind of rolling this out across their team. So excited to hear your perspective on this and why it's so important. And then the last piece, getting maniacal about what you don't know. And to me, that just screams kind of this growth mindset, both in terms of on deals, proving yourself wrong, trying to be objective and not get too excited about deals, but also just as a leader, as a person, I think that perspective, kind of leads to a lot of growth and success, not just kind of on that deal level, but, kind of across the board. So those are the three things we're going to talk about. Which one do you want to start on?
It's interesting if you think about it. There's one like, okay, oh man, I just had this train of thought because they're all connected, right? So there's the
Yes.
do we have a deal? Because if you can't align everybody on a singular problem, you don't have a deal. And if we do, how are we going to get it done? What's going to drive their urgency, i.e., the why? And then number three, how do I forecast this properly? Right. If you think about it, they all kind of build on one another. So might as well start with building consensus because honestly, that part, I mean, that and the why part, I think are kind of interconnected.
They are.
But I feel like, the building consensus piece, we talk a lot about it and you hear a lot of people write about it. You hear a lot of people share thoughts and Nate Nazarella on LinkedIn does a great job of this. And, Jen Allen and I talk a lot about multi-threading this idea, but the important thing about multi-threading is twofold. One, recognizing that every single person that's involved in this buying decision, and right now it's like anywhere from 11 to 15 people because everyone is being so overtly, not critical, but they want a bunch of eyes on this, deals. Right? Well, it's like if we're making one decision, we better make sure it's the right decision. So everyone has different priorities. Right, the CS leader who happens to be involved in this decision, they're thinking more about net dollar retention and maybe expansion. And I'm thinking about solving a different problem, maybe the forecasting problem. And it's like, why would the CS leader care about it? And so I think one of the challenges is recognizing that everybody has different problems or different priorities. But fundamentally, you have to get everybody aligned on the problem internally. Because oftentimes what you're really doing as a seller is you're pulling everybody together just to get, build consensus on the problem itself. This has nothing to do with what you sell. This has nothing to do with, with like your company whatsoever and how much better you are than your competition. This is about helping them get aligned. One of the things I talk a lot about, and it's so important to think about this, is like our job is to help our prospects and customers just fundamentally, consciously make a decision. And that decision may be do nothing. That's fine, so long as they're consciously choosing that. And in order to do that, you have to get them all together and you have to align everybody on like, okay, so I recognize the fact that you all have 18 different things. My guess is this probably doesn't fit in your top 5 priorities, but let's just get really clear about the problem. Is forecasting a problem? Yes. If you're a CS leader, is that a problem? Well, how do I connect forecasting as a VP of sales to a problem to the head of CS? Right. And so if everybody that's involved in this buying decision in a buying group, then your job is to align everybody on the singular problem. Because once you do that, then you can start to build momentum around the idea of why they might want to change away from what they're doing that's causing the problem. Right. So that's where this kind of connective tissue really is. Build consensus by getting everybody around the table aligned on the problem itself. And that's a great exercise. When you have that meeting, when they're like, oh, cool, we're excited to see a demo. It's like, time out. Before I even show a demo, I want to hear from everybody what problem you think you are trying to solve. Just right now, let's go around the room. And you'd be just flabbergasted to understand that people have their definition of the problem is very different. Right?
Yeah, totally. Even when they're buying, I find, so we actually do this thing where we do a survey post-signature before we do our first kickoff with everyone. The go-to-market team, what does success look like to each? And this is they can't see each other's answers. And it's like this 2-minute survey, kind of 5 radio buttons and then a few long form. It's almost entirely different per person, even after making the decision and aligning all the stuff and spending the money and kind of deciding to invest their time on it. So you're right, but I guess my question to you around aligning on the same problem and making this decision, when inherently those different decision makers, let's say you're talking about a revenue team, right? And there's sales, there's marketing, there's success, other folks, adding energy to the deal, you're going to want to talk about the thing that they each care most about, right? Like, how are you going to get them on the call first? How are you going to even get the time to be able to, get them to make a decision? How do you balance both getting each of those stakeholders excited about the problem and your solution while also trying to work towards a singular priority, because that's how decision
Yeah.
gets made, right? There's the classic thing where if you get everyone excited for a different thing, they're never going to actually buy at the end of the day.
Right, totally. Well, and that's
So
why
how do you balance that
that's why most
tension?
buying groups can't make a decision, right? Because they're like,
Yes.
we can't. Here's the thing: the number one the thing that happens behind closed doors that you don't see. We all sit around the table and we're like, we can't even get agreement on the problem we're trying to solve. So what are we talking about
Yeah.
here? And so the person that you've been talking to, who's been your champion, they're like, well, we're just going to push for now. Or they ghost you,
Yeah.
or they don't respond and engage, right? So, like, look, my belief is I believe in going into every conversation with a hunch or a hypothesis about the company, the industry, company, and persona that you're talking to, and having a hunch
Yeah.
about the problem that they likely struggle with, right? And so, if you've had this conversation with a buying group before, and you've got everybody aligned around a problem that is directly connected and associated with the outcomes that you can deliver. Notice the word that I say, outcomes you can deliver, because I'm not talking about solutions. I'm not talking about metrics. I'm talking about outcomes. So you've had this conversation before. So now you get to go to every person in that buying group, whether it's marketing, sales, rev ops, CS. And you're like, so my hunch is if you're like the other CS leaders that we've spoken to, here is the fundamental problem that exists across your organization. And here's actually how they've articulated what this problem looks and feels and sounds like. Just a hunch, right? So you're kind of, it's a little bit of leading the witness, but you're sharing it based on perspective from other experiences you've had talking to people just like them. And you're using that experience, and you're using the fact that this is what happened in another organization similar to yours, and this is how they got alignment around, this is how they defined the problem. I'm curious, would you define it in a similar way?
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. This
Because
is why I think that, yeah, go for it.
Well, see, here's, and I get super fired up about it, but here's the problem. Because if I go to you and I'm like, Ross, what problem do you think you're trying to solve for? Like, you're gonna be like, well, what? I don't know. I don't really know how to define this, and you know what I mean. Like, I'm putting too much work on your plate to come up with something
Yeah.
that I kind of have a point of view about already. So, I don't know. I make it a little easier for you.
It was exactly what I was about to say. Is I see the top sellers out there and the top sales organizations have a perspective, and they know
Totally.
with the persona, with the size company, with this, that's the job. A seller is only going to be successful in 2023, 2024 if they're a consultative, proactive seller. This isn't having great discovery questions. This is actually, it's way past that. It's coming in with a a business savvy, sales
Yeah.
acumen, business acumen mindset of like, I should know the top 3 to 5. And maybe it's
Yes.
this right now, maybe it's that before, but like you're going to earn the right to not even ask the questions, but then just open up and share the screen and go through the board deck if you
Dude.
come with that perspective, right? And I don't
Don't
think
it?
enough teams kind of have that mindset, right?
Because we default back to the thing that we've been talking about for 50 years, discovery, right? And guess what? Like, Ross, if I were to show up right now and ask you a whole handful of questions, even if I were to ask you 5 or 6 questions, you're like, dude, that's 5 or 6 questions that I wasn't prepared for ahead of time. Number one. Number two, I don't really know the answer because I don't even know why you're asking me, because you haven't really earned the right. And I don't know when this is going to end. And you haven't set my expectations. And I just want to get off the call. Right. Whenever as a
Exactly.
buyer, I'm getting peppered with questions, I'm like, I'm just going to feed you the answer that I think you want so I can get the hell off this call. Or so that I can ask you for a demo, or just send, give me a pitch. Like, and that's what I'm doing. I'm deflecting. But so I think as a seller, you come into the conversation like, look, I recognize, Ross, that look, right now there are more people that are involved in making a key important buying decision than ever before. I recognize that. And in a company that I was just talking to earlier, here are all the people that were involved. My hunch is you've got something similar. How's this resonating? Oh yeah, it's pretty close. Maybe, maybe 1 or 2 less. Okay, great, cool. Here's something else that I recognize. I also recognize from those conversations that they were all really kind of struggling with defining what this fundamental problem is that's kind of getting in their way. And so here's what we learned. Like, oh, well, okay, that sounds pretty good. Like, so now all of a sudden I'm like doing some work for you. Like, oh yeah, that actually sounds pretty good. Making some notes. Maybe like I should socialize this a little bit and see if this has got some alignment here, right? And so I'm already starting to kind of whittle down or filter out all the noise to get us focused on the one thing that I think might be a real issue for you. I could be wrong, by the way.
So yeah, so yeah, just to wrap this up, because I know we're gonna hit on a couple other things. So your opinion or kind of advice for folks would be really getting your team to focus on defining the problem before getting into anything else, really making
Yes.
sure that this group of folks understands and really helping them. I guess the job of a seller early on in the process, I guess throughout the process, is reorienting around a big problem. And
Yep.
that's something people will invest in instead of
Yes.
jumping straight into the solution, because you could be even solving, I think we'll talk about this in a second, probably being the whole solution of a small problem that's going to get deprioritized um, is the way to getting ghosted, or just, the no decision right now. And I think that's
Right.
what I constantly see is people get so excited to hear, oh, we have this churn problem. Oh, we help with churn though. This is the thing.
Right.
You haven't made it into the big enough thing, and you got so excited you went and sold the thing right away. Look at this
Yeah.
feature that helps with this thing, right?
We get happy ears, right? Right. That's
Yeah.
why, by the way, I'm a linguist at heart. Like, you'll notice there are very particular words that I use. The word might is also really, really important in this, because, Ross, you might be struggling with this, you might not be. It might be different. You might orient it differently. It might not be impacting you the same way that your colleagues are experiencing this. And so that's the important piece. Here's the thing though, like, the other thing about this problem, and I'm going to connect it to bullet number 2 here, which is around why.
Yeah.
The other thing about this problem is it has to connect to something that the CEO and the board and the execs care about. Because the fundamental question that you're really going to want to get to with this buying group that you're talking to around their priorities is, why might they change from what they're currently doing that is either causing the problem or that's causing them to feel the problem more so now than ever before, right? And the other thing is, why would anybody care? Right. So bullet number 2 really is like, if you want to get, really drive deal excellence, if you're a revenue leader, just put your 2-year-old hat on and quit, and just ask why all the effing time. All the time. That should be like the first word out of your mouth. Ross, you got a deal on the table? Great, cool. Why do they want to change? In their words, you tell me right now. If you can't tell me right now in their words that why you think they might want to change away from what they're currently doing, you do not have a deal. We're not forecasting it. Move it away. Right? There you go. Because that's it. That's the real question. So, like, you can get everybody, aligned on this singular problem. And then the question is like, great, now why would you want to change what you're currently doing to try and solve for this problem? Once you get everybody digging into that, like, because what we have to recognize is the reason why we lose to no decision is because the idea of change is really difficult.
Yeah.
It's frightening. I want to do it, but getting everybody else on board, I don't want to fight that battle. No way. And I have a real life example. Like, when I was at Box, I can't tell you how many times I made a decision. I had all my decision makers on board. I was the champion. I got to pick it. Everybody, I'm like, I'm the salesperson's best friend. And then we buy it, implement it, no one uses it. And then it's egg on my face. Happened twice. And I was like, I will never be leading a deal again. I'll be part of the decision. I'm not leading it. I'm not putting my name on it, because far too often people, like, they get excited about something. You get everybody, you do a great job of selling, and then I think you lose sight of the change part, right? We all sell change management, but we sell, right? Ross, you're talking about Accord changing reps behaviors. I was originally thinking you're changing buyer behaviors, and you're like, no, we're changing rep behaviors. I'm like, cool, I can get behind that. But I think one of the challenges right now in this environment that is, I'm noticing more and more, and this is across our companies and other sales leaders that I'm talking to, is we're getting our reps are getting past the why change part, and they're like, okay, this makes sense. They changing what they're currently doing might make sense, and what they're doing then is they're skipping right to the why us, which I understand. You got to give a little, but we're missing the urgency piece, and so there's a reason why deals are pushing right now, because we've totally skipped over the piece of urgency. And it's like, great, now you recognize that change might make sense. Cool. Check that box. Here's the more important box. Why the hell does it make sense for you to do this now versus waiting? A lot of people right now on LinkedIn are calling this cost of inaction. I know my friend Jen Allen, she's got this whole thesis around cost of inaction, and I love it. I challenge her and I challenge everybody else about this. As a buyer, just get this. As a buyer, you're going to ask me, like, what's it costing you for not doing anything different? Or like, what's it costing you for, keep doing what you're doing? I'm like, I don't know. And guess what? I don't care. Right? Because, like,
well, not change. If no one's bringing it up, right? You're not getting in trouble for not changing something that hasn't been changed. It's actually like the least risky thing to do. The least risky thing to do is nothing.
I know. The scarier part is like, what's the cost if I actually drive this change and it fails? I can tell you what that's going to cost. It's going
Oh
to cost
yeah.
my job or the promotion, or we're gonna lose customers or
Time
something
with my
like that. So
family
like,
instead of doing my core job. And why would I spend time with this vendor right now?
totally, totally. So there is this thing about cost of inaction that we have to be really careful about, because oftentimes the people we're talking to don't know what it's costing them. And I know we like to be like, every day you wait, every day you don't change, it's costing you X. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not really. I mean, yeah, fundamentally, maybe to the business and maybe the CFO looks at that and they see that. But to me, in my world, not so much. So then it begs the question, what's going to drive urgency,
Yeah.
right? It's going back to that problem. The more people you can get connected to that singular problem, the more people you can get everyone aligned to that problem, the more momentum you have in the organization, right? Because if it's just me, what's the cost to me of not changing? Well, it's kind of nebulous.
Totally. And this is where I think shoot, is it Sandler? One of the methodologies talk about like the personal, like the not just the business, right? You're talking about the business
Yeah, yeah,
stuff. Like at
totally,
the end of the
totally,
day, as being kind of a marketing minded person, linguist, like it always comes back to the person, the feelings, right? This is how I always, at
totally.
the end of the day, you can talk about the business outcome. That's just table stakes. Table stakes. It needs to make sense for the business. Your solution needs to be 10 times better, all this stuff. But really, why do people make decisions? Why do people really ghost you? It's because it doesn't help them get a
Yep,
promotion or
yep,
impact them in some personal way. And that's to me
totally.
why the why. That's where I think about the why now. The why
Yeah,
changes
yeah,
the
totally.
business level problem. The why us is features and functionality, and we're better in the market and social proof,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
The
yep, yep.
why now has to be personally at this person's. What are they trying to get to? Do they just come into
Yeah,
this role and they need to quickly prove out that they can do it? Are they trying to make a jump to here? What's going on
yeah,
politically in a company? Or that's what I try to think about when I think of why now to get someone to make a decision and to
yes.
champion and to go to bat for me at their company, their CEO or CFO, right?
I think it gets back to this whole idea, like what is a win for that person? What does a
Yes,
win look
exactly.
like for that person? And by the way, what does a loss look like? Right? Because oftentimes, because I think we make, again, I think we were talking about this in the beginning, but we make a lot of assumptions, right? Oh, you're a CEO of a startup, great. So a win to you means like you land more customers and you get, your valuation goes up and you can go raise more capital. But like, is that really a win to you? I mean, I'm making some assumptions, but I'm guessing, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, or the number one is that the number one priority? Is it a product thing? Is it a
Right,
whatever thing? Could be the number one
right,
blocker, and that could be kind of yeah the third thing that I'm not going to invest in right now.
right. So, I mean, this is also what makes sales so fun and interesting, and also really hard, because I'm like, all right, I'm herding cats, awesome, and the likelihood they're all going to agree on the problem is pretty low. So, okay, that's awesome. And now I've got to like connect to someone's like personal, kind of pull on their personal strings to really understand like what a win is to them. To like, okay, so now that we know there's this win, how do we drive urgency across everybody else? Because you're
Yeah,
not the only one that cares about this, because this may be priority number one for you because it's going to make you look good, but everybody else are like, yeah, I can't get to this until January. And honestly, that is happening all over the place right now. It's like, I want it right now, but I only have so much pull, right? And it's like the seven other people that are involved in this decision, they are locked down. And oh, by the way, in 3 days we're shut down for the rest of the year. So
totally.
don't know if there's a whole lot that we can do right now. But here's the thing, though. I think the other thing, and this is Todd Capone, good old buddy Todd, talks a lot about. Is like be transparent. Be like, okay, I'm going to play this thing out. Let's just say we recognize that, okay, this changing for you might make sense, and for you personally, it's going to make you look good. You might even be up for promotion next year. That's awesome. But here's the thing that I also recognize to be mostly true, and in organizations like yourselves, getting everybody else to be on the same page as you is really difficult. How do we do that? I can tell you how I've seen it done in other organizations, but I'm just curious on your end. Like, how do we, do you notice what I said? How do we do that?
Yeah, totally. Most people won't even. A lot of people will give you an answer as well that isn't necessarily the truth, not because they're lying, but because it's an impossible question to even have an answer for. Right? They're giving you
Right.
their assumptions as well.
Totally. Maybe they don't even know, right? Maybe they're like, well, I don't know. And then be like, okay, then what I might do in that case is like, hey, just for context, here's how I've seen it done in other organizations.
Yeah.
Are you open to trying that? Right. I'll do this with you. I will make this as easy as possible for you. Because there's real value to you, and honestly, there's real value to the organization if we can agree to that.
Totally.
But
Totally.
just
Well,
getting
well, let's
maniacal about why is, I think, is step number two.
let's maybe to wrap up the why piece. I'm curious to get your perspective on this, and it's probably the least sexy of the kind of the why change, the why now, and the people stuff, but like the why us. Um, Curious to get your take on how you've seen effectively folks kind of differentiate themselves in a world of 100 million different products, and we overlap here, and there's kind of
Yeah.
everyone is everything to everyone now. How do you make it really clear on the why us?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you'll notice that I put the why us at the end
Yeah.
because I got to earn the right to talk about us. And here's the thing: I can tell you 1,000 things about what we do, but I'm willing to bet 999 of those don't matter to you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if I'm doing a demo to you, Ross, I'm going to be super customized and I'm going to show you a day in the life of your role and
Yeah.
how this product can help you in your role. But here's the thing: I don't want to talk about why us until I'm really clear about the problem that we all think that we're getting agreement on, and I don't want to talk about why us until I'm really clear about why I think you might want to change away from what you're currently doing, and who that is impacting, right? And then I don't really want to talk about why us until I have a better understanding of like, why do you even care? Why do you give a shit so much about this? And once
Yeah.
I know those things, now I can align the why us and the differentiation of us to that. Right. Otherwise, because typically often, as a buyer, because most people don't talk this way, they're just like, let me ask you my 25 discovery questions. And I'm like, cool, shut the hell up, show me the product. Right? Because that's what I'm tired of getting peppered here. And what you show them, you have to show them some generic stuff. And they're like, all
Yeah.
right,
How are you gonna? Yeah.
this is just
Exactly.
like everybody else. Like, I don't understand what's different here. And now, now who I'm going to go partner with, it's not so much the product that is even absolutely the best fit. It's the best experience that I've just had.
That's
Right.
it.
So
That's all you
like,
have to go off of.
your product could be just like five others, and there are others. It's like, but if we have a great conversation and you demonstrate levels of empathy and like high give a shit factor, and you've actually done some homework, and you come to me with a perspective and point of view, then guess what? I care more about this than I do, because because I believe that you have my best interest at heart and you're trying to help.
Totally. Yeah. But I mean, like you said, it's a lot of the why us. Yes, you can talk about the specifics and do this demo, whatever. At the end of the day, your experience is the sales experience and the marketing experience. You're never going to
Yes.
get so deep where you're like, oh, this integration took 3 weeks longer, so that was worth the whole cost justification, whatever. It's like it never comes down to that, right? It always comes down to
No.
the sales experience, right?
Yeah, it's so true. It's true.
Awesome. Well, let's shift gears to kind of the outcomes a lot of it of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, right? Talking to the right person around the right problem, getting to those three whys. Your last piece is around getting maniacal about what you don't know. And it sounds like
Yep.
this is a bit about qualification. Yeah, curious to get your take on this piece.
Well, I mean, look, right now it's December 19th, and anybody that has a year end at the end of the year, end of December, maybe even into January, they're like, oh, I'm forecasting my deals. This is a commit. And you know what? How many times do we see commits fall through? Especially right now,
Too many.
right? It's way too many. Oh no, I didn't know they were going on vacation. Oh no, I didn't know because it crossed the 50K threshold that actually now the CFO needs to sign off on it. Oh no, I didn't know that they stopped procurement stops having meetings with anybody on the 15th of December because they need to close out the books. Right? Like, oh no, I didn't know these things. And I think, as a manager and even as a rep, I think it's really, really important that you constantly need to ask yourself two questions. What don't I know? Why am I going to lose this deal?
Yeah.
Like, and if you're not asking yourself those questions and you're not being really honest with yourself, and like get with your partner, get with your boss and just be like, I need to brainstorm this right now because I'm paranoid. And I think you need to be paranoid in sales because as buyers, I don't care what deal you put in front of me. I'm going to get that same deal on January 1st. I don't care. I'm going to get it because if you don't want my business, I'll go somewhere else. Right. And so like, if you're not having it, if you built the relationship and you're demonstrating that you get me and you demonstrate empathy and you've built some credibility, now we can I can even ask you, Ross, if you're, my prospect. I'm like, hey, Ross, let's just brainstorm together. Why do we think this isn't going to get done? I've got some thoughts. I wrote them down. Want to share them with you. I want to get your perspective. Help me understand, am I missing anything? Right? And if I've done a good enough job of earning the right to have this conversation, then we can do this. But by the way, I have to prep. I can't just ask that question blank. I got to come to that conversation with like, hey, I got some thoughts here. I'm thinking like, here's some things that have happened to me in the past, and I'm just kind of paranoid because I really look personally. I want to get this done. Secondly, I mean, yes, it's Christmas. It allows me to buy some gifts for my kids. But secondarily, it also it's the right thing for you and the business, and like we've talked about this, right? So here's what I've seen happen before. I just want to make sure we're anticipating some things that might happen. It's the same thing with objections, right? I look at like if you're going into one of those big meetings, write down every possible objection you think is likely going to come up, and what you could potentially ask or say in response to it. It's the same thing
Totally.
here. It's like, what don't you know?
I love how you're coming at this not from a kind of standard, what's the kind of like weekly forecast meeting for some manager to make a person feel small about a deal, but like really from actually the buyer's perspective of like partnering with them to say what could go wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you said, what's your biggest fear? If you're that champion, you're that person trying to spending more time outside of your day job, you're going to fix this business problem that is not your personal problem, where you're probably fine. You not being the one that's driving this thing forward and bringing this to a bunch of peers or people higher than you to potentially get egg on your face. You want that other person to be sharing with you. Here are the 10 different ways that this has gone wrong. Can we cross this off? Maybe this isn't a fit. What about the integrations? What about the people involved? What about the timeline? Hey, let me help you understand what could go wrong, which is going to only drive confidence. Sales is so counterintuitive, right? By talking about the things that could go wrong, you don't want that sales rep who just doesn't, everything is cool, everything's good, this is all going to work out. You want the person being like, here's the list of 17 questions. If one of these are wrong, this is probably not going to work out, and I'm going to work on this other deal.
Right,
like,
totally.
I feel so good about this person who's going to make sure that I don't look bad.
Well, and the other thing is too, like, dude, Ross, time is like one of those things that we don't get back, right? And so I don't want to waste your time. If one of these things is true or potentially true, like, let's just talk about it now so that we're not wasting time, and so we can go enjoy our Christmas, and we'll pick it up in January. Cool. Now, yes, do I feel the pressure and the anxiety of having this conversation because I'm afraid something's going to come up that like maybe I hadn't thought of that's really going to cause this deal to go sideways? Now I got to go back to my boss. I got to go to you and be like, dude, this deal that I committed, that I said was going to get done, I had the real honest conversation with him, and it turns out it's not going to get done. Yeah, that's bad. Like, that sucks. It's not, I mean, it's just like, I don't want to go to you and tell you that this happened, but I guarantee you it's better to find out on the 19th than the 31st. Right? It's better for me to be upfront and honest about it and be like, I own it. Here's where I screwed up. I won't do that again.
Totally.
I'll try not.
Totally. So what are some of the, outside of just talking to the customer, what are some ways, I know you talked about, kind of tag teaming stuff. What are some of the ways that you found this effective to kind of really get to the heart of these deals and, to kind of figure out what you don't know?
Well, I mean, go to past experience, go to your team and be like, hey, everybody, let's have a brainstorm session and talk about all the reasons why we lost a deal. Like, throw it on the table. And then just create a running doc and just have some fun with it, because like, look, we all lose deals. Like, there's so much stuff in sales that we can't control. There's a lot of information we don't know, but the more we can try and anticipate it, the more you can brainstorm with your peers about, what have they done that to help them anticipate these things. Because by the way, the more you know this, the more you can have this upfront in the conversation. Be super transparent. Be like, Ross, look, here's the deal. One thing I'm just going to lay out there right now is we could have amazing conversations over the course of the next 6 weeks, but guess what? There's still a greater than 50% chance you're going to end up sticking with what you're currently doing. It's just the reality. I'm just being honest. My job is to help you make a decision, period. And whether that decision is keep doing what you're doing or is to move to something else, could be us, could be something else, could be somebody else, could be our competitor. I don't know. But what I am going to pull from is my experience on how other people like you have gone through this process before. That's part of my job, is to help us navigate all of these potential landmines, questions, hurdles that we may face internally in your organization, internally in my own organization. And you see the way in which I'm presenting this information. It's like, look, we're in this thing together, and I'm not going to waste your
Yeah,
time if we both decide like, yeah, this is never going to get done. And the way I get this confidence is just going back to my past experiences or my teammates' experiences from what they've learned in winning a deal and losing competition and not doing, not checking all the boxes is going to help.
totally. It's that confidence and that way of framing things. I think that, it's the top kind of 5-10% of reps separates everyone from kind of the majority. But before I lose track of time, and if this was an action-packed session, I'm gonna have to re-listen to myself, write down some notes here to kind of start to do on some. I was even thinking, I was like, shit, this deal. I need to have that. I need to have that conversation with this stakeholder on this deal as we're going through it. But hopefully, some other folks that are listening to it are thinking the same thing. But
by the way, I
yeah,
can tell you, probably I can count on my hands the number of sellers that have actually had that conversation with me. It's so silly. It's like, just talk to me. I'll tell you. If you come to the conversation transparent, you're like, here's why I think this thing's not going to go through because I've seen this before and I'm kind of getting the sense like, cool, let's talk about it.
yeah. I gave the proposal a week ago. 9 times out of 10, it's signed in a day or two. It's not. Instead of me
Yeah,
hey, I hate to chase you around. Can we get on for 5 minutes before the end of the day? The
yeah,
amount of people that will respond to you instantly just because you're like actually being real with them, like, sure,
yeah.
yeah, I get it. Send a fresh note like that. But let's shift gears to my favorite part, my favorite segment, which is the rapid fire questions. We're gonna ask for one word or one sentence answers to a few questions. Then I'm gonna ask you for who we should have on next, and then I'll let you get back to it, Doug. But it's
Awesome.
been fun so far.
Yep.
Cool. Are you ready for it? Rapid
Let's do
fire
it.
questions.
Let's do it.
Okay. First one, it's an easy one, right? Main reason most teams miss their ARR targets.
Shitty products. It's a nice to have versus a must have. Sorry. I mean, it's just, you're not solving a problem that's big enough that gets people to care enough about it. So you can't close deals, and therefore you're going to miss your numbers.
Totally. Nice to have, not must have. Favorite
Yep.
resource related to revenue leadership? A book, a podcast, a course? What is it?
Oh man, I mean, I'm old. LinkedIn is great. If you follow the right people, you can get a lot of great insights. John Barrows in his Make It Happen Mondays podcast is always fun because he's real. Um, interestingly enough, books like Good to Great, which are kind of they're like off the beaten path, are really great to
Yeah,
read.
got that one up there. Yeah.
There you go. Nice.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, both the sales related stuff, but also, yeah, kind of horizontal thinkers, I think, do really well, especially in
Yep.
sales. So some of those great old ones. Number one challenge for revenue leaders going into 2024.
Um, Being really clear about the value that you can deliver to your buyers. I think right now everyone is so skittish in the market. Everyone is so worried about losing their jobs. Understanding what real value means, and not in your words, but in my words, is I think is that's going to be a big distinction. Look, when it was frothy, we were selling on features, and today you actually have to sell on real value, and value all the way up to the CEO and the board.
Yeah, totally. And I like how you put it in their words. I think that's kind of one of the hardest things, and something I think also we've gotten lazy about, not just the selling, but the positioning, I think is one
Yeah,
thing that I think that muscle is kind of getting rebuilt in a lot of organizations.
I agree.
Totally. Best segment to sell into, SMB, mid-market, or enterprise?
I mean, I love selling an enterprise because I love selling big deals and the complexity of the 8,000 moving parts. But right now, honestly, mid market is probably the best segment to be selling into because of the flexibility. Early stage, they've got a lot of pressure. Enterprise, long, complex sales cycles. Mid market, they got some flexibility to make some faster decisions.
Totally. Most important, this is a controversial one. This will get some folks in trouble. Most important organization on the revenue team, sales, CS, or marketing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I will always say CS because they're the closest to the customer. I love customer success. They're like a secret weapon. However, in this market right now, I feel like marketing is more important because it's branding, it's reorienting your ICP and get really clear about who you're targeting and why, really understanding your buyers at a level that you've never understood before. All of that that falls under marketing's purview. Without that, you're kind of flying blind. And so therefore sales and CS don't really matter as much.
Yeah, tip of the spear in a lot of ways, and my mind's been blown by the power of positioning. Shout out to April Dunford with an amazing book. If you haven't read this and you're a seller in revenue, super short read. Yeah, kind of very eye-opening how powerful that can be for everything from one-on-one conversations to kind of how you're positioning yourself in the market.
Totally.
Last one, the road to successful revenue leadership is paved with fill in the blank.
So there's this philosophy that my buddy Dustin Dino, he's over at Affinity. He's the CRO over there.
Yeah, great guy.
You should have him on. He's amazing. We've been geeking out on this whole kind of thesis around, I'm calling it the 80-80 thesis, right? Which is like, if you want to be wildly successful, you got to get 80% of your team at 80% of attainment or above. None of this mishmash of I got people at 200 and I got people at 40. Like, get the entire team to be 80% or above. That's what's going to get you to earn additional headcount. That's what's actually going to make you run in a maniacally efficient business.
Yeah, sounds like as a CEO, that sounds like a great business to have. 80% of a big team and 80%. Like, I know where my money's going. It's
right.
I'm making that bet. I'm making my 80% chance of adding one more head to be 80% effective.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's a good way of putting it. Awesome. Awesome. And yeah, sounds like Dustin's a guy we need to hit up. Chat with him a couple times. Great guy. So I'll have to follow up. Any other folks that you'd recommend us having on?
Well, I mean, friend over at Salesforce, Jennifer Langley, who just became the new CRO over at Tableau. I think she'd be really interesting, largely because she's been there for over a decade, almost 2 decades now. And Tableau, they're in the BI space. It'd be really interesting to see what they're doing with Einstein and AI too around kind of business analytics. And I'm sure she'd have some great tactical deal execution tips for you.
Awesome, awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you spending so much time sharing with us your perspective and really the startup sales community, which you've given a ton back to. So, yeah, we'll put this out, but Doug, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ross.